Welcome to the Global WarWatch Network. Forget everything you think you know about nuclear deterrence. China isn't just building more missiles, they're fundamentally changing the game. We'll reveal the astonishing capabilities that could reshape the balance of power and put every major nation on notice. This isn't just a threat, it's a paradigm shift. Today we're setting the stage for an essential discussion: China's rapid and truly significant nuclear modernization. For decades, their nuclear posture was remarkably consistent, predictable even, focused on what they called a minimum deterrent. But that's really no longer the case. We're going to dissect the how and why behind this profound and, frankly, accelerating shift, and what it means for global security and stability, and most importantly, what it means for you. Our conversation will draw from comprehensive, cutting-edge analyses from leading organizations like the Nuclear Threat Initiative, the Federation of American Scientists, the China Power Project, and Perry Worldhouse, along with crucial historical context, of course. Our mission today is to provide you with a clear, in-depth understanding of what's happening, what's changing, and why these developments truly matter.
And they absolutely do matter. I mean, the sheer scale and the speed of what we're observing in China's nuclear program, it's quite frankly unprecedented in modern history.
Right.
It really represents a crucial development in international relations that demands our full attention. Understanding this shift isn't just about, crunching raw numbers or reciting technical specs. It's about connecting the dots, moving from the specifics of their buildup to the wider implications for the evolving strategic landscape. And how those ripple effects are already reshaping the geopolitical map. It's a foundational piece of knowledge for comprehending our current global environment.
So let's begin by wrapping our heads around the sheer scale of this expansion, because China is clearly moving far, far beyond what it historically described as a minimum deterrent. For decades, their nuclear strategy was anchored in a very specific concept called assured retaliation. Now, for our listeners, what did that actually entail, and how did it shape their approach?
That's a really crucial starting point. Assured retaliation. Basically, it meant that China believed it only needed a relatively small but highly survivable nuclear force. Their goal was, well, pretty simple on paper: survive a devastating first attack from an adversary, no matter how massive it might be, and then be able to launch a credible retaliatory strike that would inflict what they termed unacceptable damage on that aggressor. You should think of it as a pure self-defense posture, not really one of preemption or, offensive coercion. Traditionally, they even went so far as to store their nuclear warheads separately from their missiles.
Right, that signaled a low alert level.
Exactly. It indicated a very low alert level, a conscious choice, really, to avoid accidental escalation and signal a non-first use intent. But as you alluded to, that philosophy and the force structure that supported it, well, it's fundamentally changing. We are currently witnessing one of the largest and most rapid nuclear modernization campaigns underway among any of the world's 9 nuclear-armed states. The speed of this transformation is genuinely breathtaking.
When you say rapid, what kind of numbers are we actually talking about here? Can you give us a sense of the quantitative leap we're seeing in their warhead count?
The numbers paint a very clear and frankly stark picture of this departure from minimum deterrence. As of January 2023, the Nuclear Threat Initiative, NTI, estimated China possessed around 410 nuclear warheads.
Okay.
That was already an increase of approximately 60 warheads from just the previous year, which is significant growth in itself.
Yeah, quite a jump.
But the growth didn't stop there.
Yeah.
Fast forward to mid-2024, and the Federation of American Scientists, FAS, estimates that China's stockpile has surged to roughly 500 warheads. And importantly, about 440 of those are actually available for immediate delivery.
Wow.
So this isn't just incremental growth, it's a significant acceleration. Now, the U.S. Department of Defense, the DoD, takes these projections even further. They anticipate China could possess around 1,000 warheads by 2030.
1,000?
1,000 by 2030, and potentially a staggering 1,500 by 2035.
1,500? That's a huge number compared to where they were.
It's a monumental projection. Now, while FAS deems these projections feasible, it's important to note they do hinge on various uncertain factors, things like production rates of fissile material, which we can maybe touch on later, and the pace of this new silo construction.
That projected growth to 1,500 warheads by 2035 is, an astonishing jump. But to put it into perspective for our listeners, how does China's current arsenal compare to the 2 established nuclear superpowers, the U.S. and Russia? Are they anywhere near parity yet?
Oh, absolutely not a parity. Not by a long shot, actually. The United States currently maintains a stockpile of roughly 3,708 warheads.
Okay.
And Russia possesses an even larger arsenal, estimated at about 4,489 warheads as of early 2025.
Right, so still significantly larger stockpiles.
Considerably smaller, yes. China's total numbers are still much smaller. However, the critical takeaway here isn't the current absolute size of their arsenal. It's the rate of their increase. As various analyses highlight, China's nuclear expansion is described as the largest and most rapid modernization effort currently underway globally. It's the trajectory you see and the ambition behind that trajectory that demands our attention, not just the raw snapshot of today's figures.
And it's not merely about the number of warheads, is it? I mean, we're talking about a comprehensive strategic shift, specifically the aggressive development of a full nuclear triad. For those unfamiliar, what exactly is a nuclear triad? And more importantly, why is it such a vital component?
You're absolutely right. It's far more than just increasing warhead numbers. A nuclear triad refers to a nation's ability to deliver nuclear weapons from 3 distinct platforms. You've got land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, then sea-based submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, on nuclear-powered submarines called SSBNs, and finally, air-based strategic bombers, land, sea, and air. The strategic importance of a triad really lies in its survivability and its flexibility. Think about it. If an adversary attempts a devastating first strike, it's incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to neutralize all 3 legs simultaneously.
That's right, too many variables.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even if they could hit fixed land-based silos, they'd still have to find stealthy submarines hidden somewhere in the vast oceans and track airborne bombers. This redundancy ensures a nation retains a credible second strike capability. It guarantees that assured retaliation we talked about, and thereby it makes a first strike against them, theoretically, unthinkable. It just complicates an adversary's targeting calculus exponentially.
Okay, let's unpack this then. China is building out all 3 legs of the nuclear triad. What does that actually look like on the ground, at sea, and in the air? Let's start with the ground-based system, specifically their ICBM force. I understand there's been a significant expansion, particularly with new silos being built.
Yes, the land-based component of China's triad is arguably the most visible and perhaps the most surprising aspect of their current expansion. They now possess over 450 ICBM launchers.
450.
Over 450 total launchers, with approximately 142 believed to be operational right now. This force includes both their long-standing, highly mobile, road-mobile systems, like the DF-31AGA, which are designed, to be moved around constantly and hidden to avoid detection.
Right, survivability through hiding.
Exactly. And now, a new generation of silo-based missiles.
And central to this new generation is the DF-41, isn't it? This is a missile that analysts have been watching very closely. What makes the DF-41 so impactful?
The DF-41 is indeed a critical piece of this puzzle. It's actually both road and potentially rail mobile, an ICBM first fielded around 2020. Its capabilities are truly impressive, an estimated range of 12,000 to 15,000 kilometers.
That's huge range.
It is. It means it can reach virtually any target in the continental United States and, frankly, most of the world. But its most significant feature is its MIRV capability.
Multiple warheads.
Multiple, independently targetable re-entry vehicles.
Yes.
Yes. Now, while the U.S. DoD assesses, it likely carries no more than 3 warheads. Some reports suggest it could carry up to 10.
10 on one missile.
Potentially, yes. The strategic implications of MIRVs are profound. A single missile can carry multiple warheads, each capable of hitting a different target, or they could all target the same area for increased destructive effect. This vastly complicates missile defense. It forces an adversary to deploy multiple interceptors for just a single incoming missile, which can quickly exhaust their defensive capabilities.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting and perhaps one of the most surprising developments: the construction of hundreds of new ICBM silos. For a nation that historically relied almost entirely on mobile systems for survivability, this seems like a complete reversal. What exactly is happening on the ground there?
It's more than interesting. I'd call it a paradigm shift in China's nuclear strategy. Alongside their mobile systems, satellite imagery and intelligence assessments reveal that China has constructed approximately 350 new ICBM silos.
350.
Around that number, yes. Across 3 vast northern desert areas, specifically in Yumen, Hami, and Ordos. These constructions were largely completed by 2023.
Okay.
This marks a truly significant change from China's traditional reliance solely on road mobile systems. Historically, as we said, mobility was favored for concealment and survivability. Silos, by contrast, are fixed, known target.
Exactly. Seems counterintuitive.
It does, but they bring a different kind of strategic advantage. The capacity for large-scale deployment and a strategy often referred to as a shell game.
Ah, the shell game. So tell us about the strategy. If silos are fixed targets, how does building more of them enhance survivability? And how does it connect back to those staggering 2035 Warhead projections we discussed earlier, that 1,500 number?
The shell game strategy directly links to those projections. By constructing such a large number of silos, 350, potentially more than their current number of ICBMs, an adversary faces tremendous uncertainty. They simply wouldn't know which silos are actually filled with live warheads. They're single warheads? Multiple MRV'd warheads? Or are some silos completely empty, just decoys?
Right, you'd have to assume they're all armed.
Precisely. This forces a potential aggressor to target every single silo in a first strike to be sure of neutralizing the threat, which significantly increases the number of warheads they would need to expend. The sheer scale of such an attack would escalate a conflict dramatically, far beyond what any nation would rationally want. So this uncertainty creates a powerful deterrent effect. It makes a disarming first strike virtually impossible to plan and execute with any confidence. It's a strategy designed to absorb a massive first blow and ensure devastating retaliatory capability survives.
Beyond sheer numbers and this shell game, China is also investing heavily in really advanced land-based delivery systems, things that sound almost like science fiction. We're talking about hypersonic glide vehicles, HGVs, and even something called a fractional orbital bombardment system. What are these, and why are they so strategically significant?
These are truly game changers, potentially. Starting with HGVs, the DF-17 missile, fielded around 2020, is equipped with one such vehicle. Unlike traditional ballistic missiles that follow predictable, high-arching parabolic trajectories.
Yeah, like a cannonball.
Sort of, yes. HGVs are launched like missiles, but then glide through the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds, Mach 5, 5 times the speed of sound, or even faster. And crucially, they do this while performing complex, evasive maneuvers.
So not predictable.
Not at all. This maneuverability at extreme speeds makes them incredibly difficult for existing missile defenses to track and intercept. They can essentially alter their flight path mid-course to evade interceptors, presenting a significant challenge to systems designed to predict fixed trajectories.
And then there's the Fractional Orbital Bombardment System, or FOBS, carrying an HGV, which China apparently tested back in 2021. This sounds even more complex and, frankly, terrifying. Explain that for us.
The FOBS system is indeed a fascinating and, yes, concerning development. Traditional ICBMs, as we said, follow a suborbital path, up and then down. FOBS, however, places a warhead into a low Earth orbit, essentially circling the globe, and then deorbits it to strike a target from orbit.
So it could come from any direction.
That's the critical point. What's truly disruptive about China's tested FOBS with an HGV is its capability to vary the deorbiting timing and follow an unpredictable flight path. Instead of flying over the North Pole, which is the shortest, most predictable route for most ICBMs from Russia or China heading to the US, a FOBS could potentially approach from the South Pole or really any direction with much less warning time.
Circumventing defenses.
Exactly, making it far more difficult to evade missile defenses compared to traditional ballistic missiles. It aims to exploit the very time-critical windows that nations rely on for decision-making and early warning. It seeks to shrink response times from minutes down to, well, maybe even less, dramatically increasing the risk of an accidental launch or miscalculation simply due to compressed timelines and the ambiguity of the incoming threat. It's really designed to circumvent existing early warning systems and missile defenses, forcing a fundamental rethink of strategic stability.
Okay, moving from land to sea now. China's sea-based systems are also rapidly enhancing their survivability, adding another critical layer to their expanding deterrent. What does their current submarine fleet look like?
The current sea-based deterrent revolves around a fleet of 6, Type 094, also known as the Jin class, nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, SSBNs.
6 of them currently.
6 that we know of, yes. These are strategic assets designed specifically to carry nuclear missiles. Each of these submarines can carry up to 12 submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs. The strategic significance of SSBNs really cannot be overstated. They are widely considered the most survivable leg of the nuclear triad.
Because they hide.
Precisely. Their stealth and mobility mean they can patrol vast ocean areas, making them incredibly difficult to locate and track continuously. This ensures that even if a nation's land-based forces were somehow completely obliterated in a first strike, their SSBNs could still launch a devastating retaliatory strike, guaranteeing that concept of assured retaliation.
And the key upgrade for these SSBNs is the JL-3 SLBM, isn't it? How does this new missile specifically enhance China's sea-based deterrent, especially regarding the United States?
The JL-3 SLBM represents a profound leap in their sea-based capabilities. It has a reported range greater than 10,000 kilometers.
10,000 kilometers.
Which is a significant improvement over its predecessor, the JL-2. And crucially, this longer range enables these submarines to reach portions of the continental United States from China's own littoral waters.
Meaning they don't have to sail far out.
Exactly. They don't have to venture far from their protected coastlines or pass through potentially vulnerable choke points like the first island chain to pose a direct threat to the U.S. homeland. This dramatically enhances both the credibility and the survivability of their sea-based deterrent. Furthermore, the JL-3 also has MIRV capability. Multiple warheads again,
Right.
meaning it can carry multiple warheads, further increasing the penetrability and destructive potential of each submarine launch. It really transforms their SSBNs from primarily a regional threat into a truly intercontinental one.
And they're not stopping there. We're hearing about the construction of a next-generation SSBN, the Type 096. What does this future submarine promise in terms of capabilities?
The Type 096 is China's ambitious leap into the next generation of SSBNs. It's still under construction, but it's expected to be significantly larger and, critically, much quieter than the current Gen class.
Quieter means harder to detect.
Much harder to detect, yes. That enhances survivability even further. More importantly, it's anticipated to be capable of fielding MIV'd SLBMs, potentially the JL-3 or something newer, with up to 24 launch tubes.
24. That's double the current capacity.
Double the capacity of the Type 094 Gen class, yes. This suggests a potential for a massive increase in the number of sea-based warheads China could deploy, along with a qualitative improvement in their stealth and operational reach. If fielded by the late 2020s or early 2030s as some project, the Type 096 will solidify China's sea-based leg as a truly robust and survivable component of its nuclear triad, adding immense strategic depth.
So with land and sea covered, that brings us to the third leg, the air. China is also completing its triad with air-based systems. What does their current strategic bomber fleet look like, and when did it become truly operational for nuclear delivery?
China's air-based nuclear delivery capability is primarily centered around their H-6 bomber variants, most notably the newer H-6N. These bombers became fully operational for nuclear delivery around 2020, according to assessments. That really marked the formal completion of China's nascent nuclear triad.
So, relatively recently.
Yes, quite recently in strategic terms. The H-6N in particular is optimized for long-range strikes, and it's designed to carry air-launched ballistic missiles, or ALBMs. This allows it to deliver nuclear warheads from a standoff distance, enhancing its survivability against enemy air defenses because it doesn't have to fly directly over the target. Now, while the H-6 is an older airframe design, not as advanced perhaps as U.S. or Russian strategic bombers like the B-2 or Tu-160,
Right.
their sheer numbers and this adaptation for nuclear roles represent a significant step in completing their triad structure.
And there's an even more advanced bomber in the works, isn't there? The H-20 stealth bomber. What do we know about this future asset? How will it further expand China's global nuclear reach?
The H-20 stealth bomber is China's ambitious next-generation project. It's still under development, shrouded in secrecy, of course. But it's expected to be China's first true long-range stealth bomber, likely with a flying wing design similar perhaps to the American B-2 or B-21. It's projected to have a range exceeding 10,000 kilometers.
Another platform with intercontinental reach.
Exactly. This would dramatically expand China's global reach for nuclear delivery, allowing them to strike targets pretty much anywhere in the world, potentially from Chinese territory or adjacent airspace, without needing complex forward basing or aerial refueling deep in hostile territory. It's speculated to be fielded sometime in the 2030s, and it would almost certainly carry ALBMs and potentially other advanced standoff nuclear weapons. Its stealth capabilities would significantly complicate any defensive response, completing a truly sophisticated and comprehensive nuclear triad. So these advancements across all three legs, land, sea, and air, demonstrate a comprehensive and ambitious modernization program that goes far beyond simply increasing warhead numbers. It's about building a versatile, survivable, and highly potent nuclear force.
As we've painted this picture of unprecedented expansion in China's nuclear hardware, the sheer scale is hard to grasp. The natural question becomes, what does all this hardware say about China's intent? Is their long-standing no-first-use policy still a guiding principle? Or are we witnessing a fundamental philosophical shift in how Beijing views nuclear weapons? For decades, China was unique among major nuclear powers for its formal NFU policy, first declared way back in 1964. They pledged to never be the first to use nuclear weapons. And as you mentioned, they traditionally kept warheads stored separately from missiles. Can you elaborate on the significance of that original pledge?
That 1964 pledge was incredibly significant, both symbolically and operationally. It really positioned China as, or at least aiming to be perceived as, a responsible nuclear power, distinct from the Cold War superpowers who were locked in this intense arms race and first strike postures. It was a political statement designed to reassure other nations, particularly those in Asia, that China's nuclear weapons were purely for defensive purposes to deter nuclear attack or blackmail, not for offensive coercion or launching first strikes.
And separating the warheads reinforced that.
Exactly. The operational separation of warheads from missiles physically reinforced this. It signaled a very high threshold for nuclear use and implied a longer decision-making timeline. Less risk of accidental or impulsive use. Only India, among the declared nuclear powers, maintains a similar formal NFU policy, though theirs is conditioned allowing for a nuclear first strike in response to a major attack with biological or chemical weapons.
Right, not quite the same.
Not quite. Russia, by contrast, reversed its NFU policy back in 1993 after the Cold War, and the U.S. has always refused to adopt one, maintaining strategic ambiguity. So China really stood apart with its unconditional pledge for a long time.
But you're saying this is changing, or at least being seriously questioned. How has China's rapid modernization brought the credibility of its NFU doctrine into question? What are analysts observing?
Well, when you look at the scale of this buildup, we're talking hundreds of new silos, advanced mobile ICBMs, new quiet SSBNs with long-range missiles, stealth bombers under development. And critically, the development of these highly advanced, hard-to-intercept delivery systems like HGVs and potentially FOBS. It naturally raises serious skepticism about whether a strictly defensive, no-first-use stance can be genuinely maintained, or if it even reflects their operational planning anymore. These seem like capabilities designed for speed, penetration, ensuring arrival on target, maybe even enabling disarming strikes in certain scenarios, not just for assured retaliation after absorbing a blow. The sheer investment, the pace, the types of systems, it suggests an ambition beyond mere survival and basic deterrence.
And a key indication of this potential shift appears to be a move toward what's called launch on warning, or LOW. Could you explain what LOW is, and what specific evidence suggests China is adopting it, despite its stated NFU policy?
Launch on warning, sometimes also referred to as early warning counterstrike, is a strategic posture. It means a nation would initiate its nuclear counterstrike upon receiving a warning of an incoming missile launch from an adversary.
Before the incoming missiles hit.
Exactly. Before those incoming missiles actually detonate on their own targets. This is a dramatic departure from storing warheads separately and waiting for an attack to land and be confirmed. It means having warheads mated to missiles, systems on high alert, ready to fire potentially within minutes of receiving that warning.
Okay, and the evidence.
The evidence for China's shift, or at least movement towards LOW, is compelling. The U.S. Department of Defense assessed back in 2022 that the PLA is, in fact, implementing aspects of this posture. Furthermore, there have been credible reports of Chinese military exercises involving simulated low-W responses. These kinds of exercises necessitate that warheads and missiles be stored together, ready for rapid launch. We've also seen China actively developing and deploying sophisticated early warning satellites, possibly, some suggest, with technical assistance from Russia. These satellites are crucial infrastructure needed to support this capability, providing the real-time data required for a rapid low-W decision.
So, if they're implementing a low posture, that fundamentally contradicts a traditional no-first-use policy, doesn't it? I mean, logically,
No.
Because it means they'd be initiating a Chinese nuclear counterstrike against an opponent before China itself is struck. That seems like a massive philosophical and operational leap.
Precisely. It's a fundamental contradiction in terms. A genuine no-first-use means you absorb the first strike, you confirm it happened, and then you retaliate. A launch-on-warning posture means you don't wait for impact. You act based on a warning signal. And that signal could, theoretically, be a false alarm, or perhaps even a large-scale conventional missile attack misidentified as nuclear.
A huge risk.
A huge risk of catastrophic miscalculation. This is why the U.S. Department of State formally described China's NFU policy as ambiguous in 2024. The stated doctrine, the words, no longer seem to fully align with their observable capabilities, their infrastructure investments, and their reported exercises. And this ambiguity itself is strategically destabilizing. It introduces doubt and uncertainty, complicating an adversary's calculations, especially in a tense crisis situation.
Beyond level IQ, there are even more concerning reports. perhaps interpretations of Chinese strategic writings, signaling a potential willingness to actually lower the nuclear threshold. What does this phrase mean, and how does it alter the risk landscape?
Lowering the nuclear threshold suggests a potential willingness to consider the use of nuclear weapons earlier in a conflict than previously assumed. Perhaps even in response to purely conventional attacks by a strong adversary, especially if China felt it was losing conventionally or its vital interests were threatened. It's a profound shift from viewing nuclear weapons solely as the ultimate deterrent reserved for existential threats or responding to another nuclear attack.
So, using them in a conventional fight?
Potentially. Reports indicate some Chinese strategic writings have signaled a possible willingness to actively carry out strong, forceful nuclear coercion, even in such conventional scenarios. Imagine, say, a major conventional naval clash escalating badly in the South China Sea, or perhaps a large-scale cyber attack targeting China's critical infrastructure. Traditionally, nuclear weapons would be considered completely off the table in those situations. But this shift suggests China might, under certain extreme circumstances, consider a limited nuclear demonstration, a so-called shot across the bow, or maybe even a very localized nuclear strike to halt a conventional intervention or deter further conventional aggression from a powerful opponent like the U.S. This fundamentally alters the calculus for adversaries and seriously blurs the long-held firebreak, that clear boundary between conventional and nuclear warfare.
That's incredibly concerning. It implies nuclear weapons could be seen as tools for political or military leverage within a conventional conflict, not just a last resort against nuclear annihilation. And what's the impact of this potential shift on decision-making timelines in a crisis, especially when you factor in these new, advanced, high-speed systems?
This potential willingness to consider nuclear use in conventional scenarios, combined with the development of advanced, hard-to-intercept systems like HGVs and FOBS, compresses an adversary's response window to an unprecedented degree. These capabilities inherently shrink decision-making timelines for both sides. If a weapon can hit its target in just minutes from launch, or if its trajectory is unpredictable until the last moment,
There's no time to think.
very little time. The window for detection, identification, assessment, consultation, and response dwindles to perhaps mere minutes, maybe even less. The ambiguity surrounding their NFU policy, the observable move towards a low posture, and this potential lowering of the nuclear threshold. It all contributes to a significantly heightened risk of miscalculation, of accidental escalation based on incomplete information or false warnings, and ultimately a potentially faster sprint towards nuclear conflict if a major crisis erupts. It's a very dangerous combination that demands clear communication channels and robust de-escalation mechanisms,
Which seem to be lacking right now.
which are worryingly lacking, particularly between the U.S. and China, at the strategic level.
So, with all these dramatic changes, the massive buildup, the apparent shift in doctrine, the obvious and most pressing question is why? Why now? What's driving this surge in China's nuclear capabilities, particularly given their traditional, more restrained posture? One of the primary drivers appears to be external perceptions and their overarching geopolitical ambitions. It seems China wants to achieve, or be perceived as achieving, approximate nuclear parity with the United States and Russia, viewing it as essential, perhaps, to bolster its international standing as a true great power.
That's certainly a monumental factor, yes, and it speaks volumes about China's aspirational goals on the global stage. But it's likely multifaceted. China also seems to genuinely perceive its deterrent being challenged by other countries' capabilities, particularly the nuclear forces, and maybe more importantly, the missile defense capabilities of the United States. They view systems like the U.S. ground-based mid-course defense, GMD, which is designed to intercept ICBMs heading towards the U.S. homeland, and regional systems like Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, CAD, deployed in places like South Korea and Guam. They see these as potentially eroding the effectiveness of their existing, relatively smaller nuclear forces.
They think defenses could stop their retaliation.
From Beijing's perspective, yes. These defenses could potentially negate their ability to conduct that assured retaliation we talked about earlier, undermining their core deterrent. So to counter these perceived threats, China is actively MIRVing more of its warheads, putting multiple warheads on a single missile to overwhelm defenses. And they're employing penetration aids, things like decoys and chaff released alongside the real warheads, to confuse sensors and enhance the penetrability of its missiles. This ensures, in their view, that they can overwhelm and defeat existing and future missile defenses. It's a direct technological response to what they see as a growing threat to their deterrent credibility.
And what about regional tensions? We've certainly seen an alarming increase in rhetoric and military activity lately, especially concerning Taiwan, but also in the South China Sea. Are nuclear weapons playing a new role in that dynamic? Could this buildup be partly about gaining regional leverage?
Absolutely, that seems highly likely. Chinese leaders may indeed be reconceptualizing the role of nuclear weapons in a regional crisis, particularly regarding the extremely sensitive issue of Taiwan. A stronger, more versatile, perhaps more ambiguous nuclear arsenal could provide significant additional political and military leverage in a potential conventional conflict over Taiwan or elsewhere. It effectively raises the stakes for any external intervention, primarily by the United States.
Making the U.S. think twice about intervening.
Precisely. The thinking might be that a more robust, potentially implicitly threatening nuclear umbrella would make the region safer for them to pursue their conventional objectives, whether that's achieving reunification with Taiwan by force or solidifying their control over disputed territories in the South China Sea. It forces adversaries, especially the U.S., to constantly consider the potential for nuclear escalation, even in what starts as a conventional fight, making them more hesitant to intervene directly or forcefully.
But Dr. Christopher Ford, a respected analyst whose work we've reviewed, raises a really interesting, almost paradoxical observation about this buildup. He notes that China's massive nuclear expansion is occurring at a time when its conventional forces are arguably more powerful relative to any conceivable external power than at any point since, well, the Qinglong Emperor's reign in the 18th century. And he says the specific nuclear threats China faces are relatively low, especially given the significant post-Cold War reductions in nuclear arsenals by both the U.S. and Russia. So this raises an important question for you. Why such an expansion now? If they're already so strong conventionally and face relatively diminished nuclear threats compared to the past, what does this paradox tell us?
It's a really compelling paradox, and it forces us to look beyond just immediate perceived security threats. It strongly suggests that while external threats and missile defenses are certainly part of the calculation, they might not be the only or even the primary driver behind this surge. This dramatic expansion could point to a much more expansive, perhaps more deeply ingrained aspirational goal for China, a desire not just for security or deterrence, but for a fundamental, irreversible shift in the global balance of power, a reassertion of what they see as their rightful central place in the international order.
Seeking true superpower status across the board.
Exactly. They might be seeking to become a true great power, not just economically or conventionally where they've already made huge strides, but across all dimensions of national power, including achieving strategic nuclear parity or maybe even superiority in certain aspects. This would be a status backed by overwhelming military strength, both conventional and nuclear, enabling a level of geopolitical influence and freedom of action they haven't held in centuries. Looked at this way, it's less about immediate threats and more about a long-term strategic play for global preeminence, not just regional security.
That's a powerful and somewhat sobering insight. But is this rapid nuclear buildup truly unconstrained? Are there any potential limitations to this surge? Are there any internal factors, perhaps, that could slow it down or even make us question those high-end projections we've discussed, like the 1,500 warheads by 2035?
Yes, there are potentially two significant limitations or constraints that deserve scrutiny, and they offer a more nuanced view of China's path forward. The first, and probably most quantifiable, is China's relatively small historical reserve of weapons-grade fissile material, specifically highly enriched uranium, HEU, and plutonium, the essential ingredients for nuclear bombs. While their existing stockpile is likely sufficient to support maybe a doubling or tripling of their current warhead numbers, to reach those highly ambitious projections of more than 1,000 or even 1,500 warheads by 2035, they would need to undertake significant additional production of these materials.
They need to make more bomb fuel, basically.
Essentially, yes. This is why international concerns have been repeatedly raised about China constructing new fast breeder reactors and reprocessing facilities. While these facilities can have legitimate civilian nuclear energy applications, the U.S. Department of Defense explicitly views them in this strategic context as potential national defense investment projects, because they could be readily used to produce the large quantities of plutonium needed for a much larger nuclear arsenal. The rate of fissile material production will be a key bottleneck, or enabler, determining whether those 2035 projections are truly achievable.
Okay, fissile material is one potential constraint, and the second limitation. I've heard some whispers, unconfirmed reports really, about internal issues within China's military, specifically the rocket force. Could these impact their nuclear program?
The second potential limitation involves these widespread, though it's crucial to stress, largely unsubstantiated reports of significant corruption and potential quality issues within China's military procurement program, including the PLA rocket force, which controls most nuclear missiles. These reports, while not officially confirmed and often difficult to verify independently, suggest potential systemic problems. For instance, there have been some dramatic, albeit unverified, claims circulating like missiles being filled with water instead of liquid fuel, or Chinese missile silos suffering from serious quality control issues, like improperly sealed lids that would degrade the missile's readiness and lifespan over time.
Wow, water instead of fuel. That sounds almost unbelievable.
It does sound extreme. And again, we must treat these specific reports with caution as they lack independent verification. However, if widespread corruption and systemic quality control issues are indeed prevalent within the PLA rocket force, it could certainly affect the reliability, the accuracy, and the overall operational readiness of their missile force. This would, in turn, cast some doubt on the pace of projected growth, and more critically, the actual operational effectiveness and strategic credibility of their growing arsenal. It introduces an element of uncertainty, an unknown variable, into any external assessment of their true capabilities versus their stated or projected ones.
This brings us to the profound global implications of China's nuclear ascendance. This isn't just about China and its immediate neighbors. It's fundamentally reshaping the global strategic balance and, frankly, ushering in a new and potentially more dangerous era of nuclear risk. For one, China's rapid buildup clearly risks exacerbating a renewed nuclear arms race. We see a debate already. The Biden administration has stated the U.S. doesn't necessarily need to match numbers or increase its arsenal size. But on the other hand, some voices in Congress and various experts are calling for expansion or modification of the U.S. posture in response to the combined challenge from China and Russia. They warn that failing to adapt could actually fuel China's ambitions even further. What's the core tension here?
The core tension lies in the very delicate, often unstable balance of deterrence. When one major nuclear power significantly expands and modernizes its arsenal, especially as rapidly as China is doing, others, particularly existing nuclear powers, feel compelled to respond in some way to maintain their own deterrent credibility. It's the classic security dilemma playing out in the nuclear realm. This creates a dangerous feedback loop, an action-reaction cycle. While the U.S. currently has a much larger and arguably more sophisticated arsenal overall, China's rate of growth, combined with its advanced new capabilities like HGVs and that large-scale shell game silo strategy, well, this could be perceived by planners in Washington as eroding America's strategic advantage over time.
So perception matters as much as reality.
Perception is critical in deterrence. This perception, whether fully accurate or not, could then lead to stronger calls within the U.S. for modernizing, potentially expanding or changing the deployment of the U.S. arsenal, which, in turn, could prompt Russia to accelerate its own modernization or buildup, thus potentially igniting a full-blown three-way nuclear arms race. We haven't really seen that before. It's a spiral of perceived threats and counter-responses that has historically led to dangerous accumulations of weapons and heightened instability.
And this is where it gets really interesting, and as you said, a truly historically unprecedented challenge, the two-peer problem. What exactly is this, and why does it represent such a significant increase in nuclear risks for, say, the United States, but also potentially for Russia?
The two-peer problem is precisely what makes this current moment so unique and strategically complex. For the first time in the nuclear age, the United States finds itself facing the challenge of simultaneously deterring two nuclear-armed great power adversaries, China and Russia, both of whom are actively modernizing and expanding their nuclear arsenals, and whose strategic interests often seem to align, at least partially, in opposition to the West or the U.S.-led order.
It used to be just the Soviet Union, then Russia.
It's exactly. Historically, U.S. nuclear strategy and force planning primarily focused on deterring the Soviet Union and then post-Cold War Russia as essentially a single peer nuclear competitor. Now, Washington, and Moscow, too for that matter, must manage complex deterrence relationships with two distinct, powerful nuclear forces simultaneously. This situation directly and profoundly increases nuclear risks. It multiplies the number of potential flashpoints for conflict around the globe. It vastly complicates arms control efforts. How do you even structure a treaty with three unequal parties? And it places immense pressure on both Washington and Moscow to potentially build and deploy more nuclear weaponry themselves, or different types, just to ensure they feel they can adequately deter both threats concurrently under various scenarios. The Biden administration's recent directive to the Pentagon, instructing it to adapt planning and develop options for simultaneously deterring aggression by China, Russia, and North Korea, that clearly reflects this new, much more complex reality. It demands a fundamental rethinking of U.S. strategic posture. affecting everything from war plans and targeting to force structure and defense budgets for decades to come.
And beyond the interactions between the major powers, China's actions are also creating serious proliferation pressures across the Indo-Pacific region, aren't they? Straining the global non-proliferation regime, which has been more or less a cornerstone of security since the Cold War.
Yes, absolutely. If we connect this build-up to the bigger picture, China's military expansionism in general, and its increasing territorial ambitions and assertiveness, whether it's in the South China Sea, along the Himalayan border with India, or most acutely concerning Taiwan, all of this is creating profound and, I would argue, increasing incentives for China's neighbors to potentially reconsider their own non-nuclear status, maybe to develop their own nuclear weaponry.
They feel less secure.
They feel less secure, and perhaps they begin to doubt the reliability or sufficiency of existing security guarantees, primarily from the United States. This directly and severely strains the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT regime, which is fundamentally based on a bargain. Non-nuclear states forego weapons in exchange for access to peaceful nuclear technology and implicitly or explicitly security assurances from the nuclear powers. Historically, U.S. military strength and its robust extended deterrence commitments to the nuclear umbrella provided to allies like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and NATO members were powerful non-proliferation tools.
The U.S. promised to defend them, remove the need for their own bombs.
Exactly. The U.S. successfully dissuaded allies like Taiwan in the late 1980s and South Korea back in the 1970s from pursuing nuclear weapons precisely because these assurances were seen as credible. But China's growing power and assertiveness, coupled with questions sometimes raised about the long-term U.S. commitment to the region, are forcing nations to reconsider their options.
Can you give us some specific examples? Which countries in the region might be feeling this pressure most acutely? And what capabilities or history makes them potential proliferators if the situation deteriorates?
Well, several nations come to mind, but perhaps the most frequently discussed are Japan and South Korea. Take Japan. It possesses a substantial quantity of separated plutonium as a byproduct of its large civilian nuclear power program. We're talking 44.5 tons total, with about 8.6 tons currently held on Japanese territory.
And how much is needed for a bomb?
To put that 8.6 tons into perspective, using the International Atomic Energy Agency's standard figure for a rudimentary fission device, around 8 kilograms of plutonium, that material could theoretically be turned into over 975 nuclear bombs.
Wow, the technical capacity is there.
The technical capacity and the material are undeniably there, even though Japan maintains a strictly civilian nuclear program and adheres firmly to its non-nuclear weapons policy enshrined in its constitution and culture. But the potential exists if the political will were ever to shift dramatically due to perceived existential threats. Similarly, South Korea has a highly sophisticated nuclear power industry. They also had past clandestine enrichment experiments in the early 2000s, though these were quickly curtailed under intense U.S. pressure. Moreover, South Korea has been actively developing increasingly impressive long-range conventional missile capabilities in recent years.
So they have missile tech too.
They have advanced missile technology. The underlying concern is that if these nations, Japan, South Korea, maybe others further down the line, perceive America's extended deterrence, its promise to defend them with its own nuclear weapons if necessary, as weakening or becoming less credible in the face of China's growing conventional and nuclear power. They might eventually see indigenous nuclear weaponization as their last best hope to deter Chinese coercion or attack and secure their own national sovereignty. This potential proliferation cascade is putting immense stress on the NPT regime, which really relies on trust, transparency, and credible security assurances.
And it's not just China creating instability here. The legal foundations of arms control seem to be eroding more broadly, aren't they? Russia's actions have also contributed significantly to this deterioration.
Exactly. It's a compounding problem that weakens the entire global arms control architecture, making proliferation seem more attractive or necessary to some. Russia's documented violations and eventual withdrawal from the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces (INF) Treaty, its more recent revocation of its ratification of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty (CTBT), and its ongoing suspension of participation in the New START Treaty's verification measures. All these actions send a dangerous message globally.
Undermining trust in treaties.
Precisely. They chip away at decades of painstaking diplomatic efforts to constrain nuclear weapons and reduce the risks of their use. And in this already deteriorating environment, China's consistent rejection of joining any meaningful arms control talks with the U.S. and Russia further complicates the landscape. Their official reason is usually a much smaller size of their forces compared to the U.S. and Russia. But as their arsenal grows rapidly towards that 1,000-plus warhead mark, that argument starts to lose its logical force.
It becomes harder to justify staying out.
It does. This refusal to engage creates a vicious cycle. A lack of transparency and dialogue fuels mistrust and worst-case planning assumptions on all sides, which in turn fuels the perceived need for more weapons, leading to a less predictable and ultimately more dangerous world for everyone.
Now let's talk about the ultimate nightmare scenario, escalation risks. Specifically, how a conventional conflict could potentially spiral into nuclear use. Dr. Christopher Ford, whom we've mentioned, made a stark point about this, connecting it directly to China's regional actions.
Yes. Dr. Ford's view is critical here, and it's chillingly direct. He argues, based on his analysis, that the most likely scenario for nuclear war today is escalation from a conventional conflict involving nuclear-armed powers. Not a bolt-from-the-blue surprise attack, but an escalatory spiral. He then goes on to directly link China's regional aggression, its expansion and militarization in the South China Sea, its territorial claims and border incursions in the Himalayas against India, and its escalating military preparations and pressure campaign regarding a potential invasion of Taiwan. He links these actions directly to creating the greatest risk of multi-party conventional war in the region today.
And a conventional war that could draw in the U.S.
Exactly. A conventional war that could easily draw in the United States and its allies. And, by extension, he argues, this dynamic leads to the greatest risk of nuclear escalation involving the United States. The logic is straightforward, if grim. If China's conventional aggression leads to a major high-intensity conflict with another nuclear-armed power like the U.S., the risk increases dramatically that one side or the other, facing conventional defeat or seeking a decisive advantage, might resort to using nuclear weapons first.
And part of that increased risk comes from the blurring of thresholds between conventional and nuclear conflict, doesn't it? The line seems to be becoming increasingly ambiguous, making it harder to predict where a conventional fight might cross that critical nuclear threshold.
Yes, the lines are indeed blurring, and it's a deeply concerning trend globally, not just with China. We see echoes of this perhaps in India's development of air-V ballistic missiles like the Agni-V, which some analysts argue shifts their posture away from a pure, credible minimum deterrent towards something that could be perceived as having a potential first-strike capability, potentially destabilizing its nuclear rivalry with Pakistan. Now, apply that concept of blurring lines to China. They are not only rapidly expanding their strategic arsenal, but also deploying potent regional nuclear-capable forces, like the DF-26 intermediate-range ballistic missile, often dubbed the Guam Killer, and the newer, longer-range DF-27. These systems are thought by some analysts to provide China with usable nuclear options on every rung of the escalation ladder.
Meaning they could use nuclear weapons in more limited ways.
That's the implication. It suggests a potential willingness or doctrine to integrate nuclear threats, or even limited nuclear use, into conventional military operations. Perhaps as a means of coercion or de-escalation through escalation, using a limited nuclear strike to shock an adversary into backing down conventionally. This means the threshold for nuclear use becomes far less clear, far less absolute. The psychological barrier, the nuclear taboo, could potentially erode if nuclear weapons start being viewed as somewhat more conventional, more usable tools of statecraft or warfare. A tactical or regional nuclear strike, for example, could perhaps be presented internally or even externally as a regional limited tool, making the decision to use it potentially easier and the adversary's response far more unpredictable.
What about the impact of emerging technologies here, like artificial intelligence, lasers, things like that? We've heard a lot about AI potentially changing warfare. Could AI-powered counter-hypersonic warheads be a factor, or are the risks more general?
It's a great question. While the sources we've drawn from for this discussion don't specifically detail active Chinese programs for AI-powered counter-hypersonic warheads, that is, defensive systems using AI to shoot down hypersonic missiles, they do strongly emphasize the broader and arguably more immediate profound impact of AI and other leading-edge technologies on overall strategic stability. The core concern, repeatedly highlighted, is that these technologies, AI and command and control, autonomous systems, cyber warfare, directed energy, are inherently shrinking decision-making timelines for national leaders in a crisis.
Making everything happen faster.
Much faster. And potentially precipitating the breakdown of deterrence as we've understood it. For example, one specific threat mentioned is China's rapidly developing ground-based laser capability that could potentially target U.S. satellites.
Blinding satellites.
Exactly. This is a major concern because it could potentially neutralize an opponent's eyes and ears, their space-based surveillance, reconnaissance, communications, and crucially, their missile early warning capabilities. Without reliable, timely information on incoming threats or the adversary's actions, a nation's ability to maintain credible deterrence and make rational decisions is severely compromised. It could lead to shoot-first impulses based on uncertainty, fear, or misinterpretation of partial data. So the focus regarding AI and emerging tech in these analyses is less on specific futuristic weapons like AI interceptors, and more on AI's general role in compressing the time leaders have to make critical life or death decisions, potentially introducing autonomous elements that might bypass human control loops, and its overall potential to break down existing deterrence frameworks by making everything faster, more complex, and less predictable.
So essentially, AI and these advanced technologies are accelerating everything and making it less predictable, which inherently increases risk across the board. And then there's the specter of polycrisis or multi-front wars. We're not just talking about deterring China in isolation anymore, are we? This complicates deterrence exponentially.
No, we're definitely not. And this is perhaps the most complex strategic challenge of this new era. There's a palpable increasing likelihood of simultaneous crises or contingencies involving multiple nuclear-armed states. Think about potential scenarios involving China, Russia, North Korea, and of course the US and its allies, all potentially active at the same time in different regions. Imagine a severe crisis erupting over Taiwan, requiring massive US attention and resources in the Pacific, while simultaneously facing renewed aggression or pressure from Russia in Eastern Europe, or maybe significant provocations from North Korea on the Korean Peninsula.
Stretching resources and attention thin.
Extremely thin. This means allies in both the Indo-Pacific and Europe increasingly need to be prepared and assured that they can deter potentially a two-front war or even more complex scenarios involving nuclear threats simultaneously. This new, complex, multipolar nuclear landscape demands a fundamental rethinking of deterrence theory and practice itself. We need to move beyond the relatively simpler bilateral Cold War models to a more integrated, comprehensive, and adaptable approach, one that accounts for multiple, potentially interconnected threats arising across different theaters at the same time. It's truly an unprecedented strategic challenge for policymakers and military planners.
Okay, so given this incredibly complex and, let's be honest, alarming situation, a rapidly expanding Chinese arsenal, ambiguous doctrines shifting away from NFU, rising proliferation risks nearby, shrinking decision times due to new tech, and the two-peer problem, what are the potential pathways back towards stability? What specific risk reduction measures are being proposed by analysts and policymakers to try and manage this new reality? Dr. Christopher Ford, whom we've quoted, suggests what he calls the most obvious solution, which is for China itself to simply curtail its military and nuclear buildups and abandon its ambition to dominate its neighbors. But as you said earlier, that sounds perhaps like an ideal solution, maybe a distant one.
It is indeed presented as the ideal, and for many observers, certainly a highly desirable outcome for long-term stability. However, achieving it would require a truly fundamental and arguably quite unlikely in the current climate shift in Beijing's core geopolitical ambitions and its fundamental strategic calculus about its role in the world. It's a vision for a less confrontational future, certainly, but one that doesn't currently seem to align with the observable trends in their military modernization or foreign policy actions.
Right. So while that ideal solution is clear, what are the more concrete, specific, and perhaps practical steps that could actually help reduce these growing nuclear risks in the near to medium term? What can we realistically aim for, even if China doesn't fundamentally change course?
On the diplomatic front, a crucial and often cited step, though challenging, is for China to stop shunning substantive arms control discussions with the United States. Many experts and governments are calling for China to finally agree to work towards some form of trilateral arms control dialogue involving the US and Russia.
Bringing China into the arms control framework.
Exactly. This would be a significant move, especially as China has, as we noted, historically rejected such talks, always citing the much smaller size of its arsenal compared to the other two superpowers. But with its arsenal now growing so rapidly and projected to potentially reach over 1,000 warheads, that argument is losing much of its previous justification. Meaningful talks, even if they don't lead to immediate treaties, could at least lead to greater transparency, predictability, and maybe some mutual understanding of doctrines and capabilities.
Beyond formal arms-controlled treaties, which seem difficult right now, what about broader diplomatic gestures or confidence-building measures that might just reduce the risk of miscalculation or accidental conflict?
That's a very important area. Another proposal often discussed is for all powers in the Indo-Pacific, including China, to perhaps publicly, quote, renounce the use of force to settle regional disputes, specifically mentioning key flashpoints like Taiwan and the South China Sea. Of course, such declarations would need to be backed by demonstrating sincerity through concrete, practical steps and verifiable actions like scaling back provocative military exercises or deployments aiming to genuinely de-escalate regional tensions that could otherwise spiral into larger conflicts. Additionally, there's a strong and persistent call for the U.S. and China to engage in regular, substantive, broad risk reduction talks. The focus here is less on limiting numbers and more on reducing the danger of unwanted or accidental escalation.
Like establishing rules of the road.
Precisely. This could involve developing modern analogs to the 1972 U.S.-Soviet Incidents at Sea Agreement, which created protocols and communication channels to prevent accidental clashes between naval vessels and aircraft during the Cold War. Given China's frequent use of gray zone tactics and provocations, particularly in the South China Sea, such updated agreements, potentially expanded to include coast guards and other actors, or even other regional countries, could establish clearer rules of engagement to avoid unintentional conflict spiraling out of control.
And transparency, or rather the glaring lack thereof from China, has been a recurring theme throughout our entire discussion. How does promoting greater transparency fit into this framework of risk reduction?
China's inherent lack of transparency regarding its nuclear forces, its doctrine, its intentions, is widely seen as a core problem that breeds mistrust and fuels worst-case planning assumptions in other capitals. It makes it, as one source put it, impossible to fully understand Beijing's motives or to accurately grasp the exact nature of China's evolving capabilities.
You fear what you don't know.
Exactly. When you don't know what the other side is doing or why they're doing it, you tend to assume the worst and prepare for it, which fuels the security dilemma. Therefore, dialogue, even if it's not immediately about negotiating formal arms control treaties, can be immensely valuable simply for building basic understanding, demystifying intentions, clarifying doctrines, reducing the inherent risks that stem from ambiguity and mistrust. Just getting military leaders talking to each other regularly can help. China sharing more information about their strategic doctrine, the actual size and nature of their deployed forces, and perhaps clarifying their red lines. These would be foundational steps toward building just enough trust to prevent catastrophic miscalculation in a crisis.
And finally, what about reinforcing deterrence itself on the U.S. and allied side, and perhaps trying to establish new norms, especially for these disruptive emerging technologies like AI, which we know can shrink decision times so dangerously?
Reinforcing credible deterrence is undeniably critical from the perspective of the U.S. and its allies. The U.S. is certainly responding actively by modernizing its own nuclear triad, developing new ICBMs, bombers, and submarines, and importantly, developing new operational concepts and potentially new capabilities for simultaneously deterring aggression from China, Russia, and North Korea. This often involves integrating advanced conventional non-nuclear systems and strengthening allied cooperation and interoperability.
Making sure the deterrent remains believable.
Believable and adaptable to this new multi-threat environment, yes. Reinforcing extended deterrence through visible diplomatic and military actions, such as the Washington Declaration with South Korea, which established a new nuclear consultative group, is also vital. These measures aim to reassure allies like South Korea and Japan, reducing any incentive they might feel to pursue their own independent nuclear options, which would further destabilize the non-proliferation regime. On emerging technologies like AI, there's a general and quite urgent recognized need for serious international discussions, probably starting among like-minded nations first, to group and establish clear norms and codes of conduct around AI's military applications.
Rules for AI and warfare.
Sort of. The goal would be to manage the rapid escalatory dynamics that AI could introduce, and to specifically reduce the risk of accidental nuclear escalation stemming from AI-enabled weapon systems or decision support tools. We might need new frameworks, perhaps beyond traditional arms control models, to address these unique technological challenges, ensuring that these powerful advancements don't inadvertently lower the threshold for conflict or lead to a catastrophic breakdown of deterrence due to speed and automation. The overall aim across all these potential measures, diplomacy, transparency, arms control dialogue, reinforcing deterrence, managing new tech, is fundamentally to de-escalate potential conflicts and prevent the breakdown of deterrence in this incredibly complex and rapidly evolving nuclear landscape.
Despite all the alarming trends and the heightened risks we've explored today, it is worth remembering, perhaps holding on to, the fact that the nuclear taboo, that strong psychological and normative inhibition against using nuclear weapons, has largely held since the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. The critical question for all of us, then, is how do we collectively ensure that it continues to hold firm in this new, more complex, rapidly evolving nuclear age where the old rules of engagement seem to be getting rewritten before our very eyes? Thank you so much for joining us for this essential discussion on China's nuclear ascendance and its global implications. We truly appreciate you spending your valuable time with us. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the Global WarWatch Network if you found this informative. We genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this complex topic, so please feel free to share them in the comment section below the video or audio. You can also join the conversation with us on social media. All the relevant links are provided for you in the description. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.